Good morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever it is for you. I'm Brent, an author, amateur world builder, writing educator. You can find me at werewolf_doctor on DR, on Threads, Instagram, Patreon, Ko-Fi, and YouTube, as well as here, obviously. You can also find me as werewolf-doctor over on Bluesky. Today, I don't really have anything particular in mind for the day. So I think I can either work on some stuff. I'm kind of in a big push right now, so my writing schedule is fairly, or my writing to-do list is fairly broad, but as currently in the last week of classes, so I am kind of in a bit of a big push to get a fair bit of projects, or at least one project, relatively wrapped up before next week when the blizzard of grading occurs for finals week. The joyful life of an educator. So I'm kind of doing a big push for myself on the Fairlands part of the Junction verse, or Junction multiverse. I currently have about, 2.5 documents to finish up, making notes into something readable for that, as well as one document that needs some ground up creation. So those are kind of going in process. I'd like to get as many of those as possible done. My goal is to get those by the end of the week, or as close to that by the end of the week as I can. I do have Avendor stuff to type up, which is also part of the Junction. And I'd like to expand, at some point I'd like to expand the Rayrek Isle details and also add in part of a new project that ties into, or is the same world as Rayrek. Rayrek is the world that is kind of an ideal of some sort, where we have basically libraries, schools, tea houses, inns that are all very kind of like highly thought of within society across the island. But I've kind of expanded this idea out. When I was thinking about putting together the mainland, I started thinking about whether I wanted to have a whole continent or whether I wanted to do something else with it. And I ended up coming with this thing of, rather than doing a whole continent, as a mainland. So the Rayrek Isle is roughly the size of, say, Great Britain, give or take a little bit. So that gives it some space to, in terms of equivalence, that gives it some space to have a number of larger cities, a decent sized a rather large population potentially, some varied geography, and different cultures and that sort of thing. If we think about it, Great Britain, before the English took everything over, basically had at least four cultures on it, major ones at least. Arguably more than that, because you have the quote unquote English Celts, who were kind of the Britons. You had the Cornish, you had the Welsh, you had the Scots. Even when the Angles and Saxons took over, you still had the Cornish and the Welsh and the Scots kind of floating around for a while, until the Normans eventually absorbed all of those to one degree or another. So that island seemed like a good size idea to work with there. But I had the mainland, references to the mainland. I've got to revise to take those out, because I think what I'm going to do with an additional is, rather than having a mainland, it's going to expand off into a sort of second island. But this one's going to be about the size of Greenland, roughly, which would be about 10 times the size of Rayrek. So it's effectively a mainland, but it's still relatively small compared to, say, like a continent. Of course, geologically, continent is a weird concept, or a weird term in that there's a lot of debate about what exactly constitutes a continent. In some cases, I remember looking this up a while back because different cultures, different societies talk about different numbers of continents. Typically in at least American culture, we talk about 7 continents. You got North America, South America, Antarctica, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia. But in other cases, we talk about 4 continents or 5 continents or 6 continents. And there's that question where we're getting into things of how exactly do we define how this works. Because some places teach there are 6 continents. North America, South America, Africa, Eurasia, Australia, and Africa. Other cases, I've seen other slightly smaller numbers. And a lot of that depends on whether we are, I guess, defining continents based on plates, based on tectonics, based on geopolitical stuff, this sort of thing. There's apparently even some debate if you're separating Europe and Asia out as to where exactly that line goes. I'm even looking at 2 maps right now that are very different from each other. One has Turkey as being European, one has Turkey as being Asian in terms of continents. So it's kind of a rough sort of idea. But anyway, second island, quote-unquote mainland, I'm looking at being about the size of Greenland, roughly speaking, which would be about 10 times the size of Rayrik. That'll be Ailrus, and there's going to be other stuff going on with that. Essentially, I've got a list of things that... So every island in this world is going to be rather different. Or maybe for the hemisphere, I'm not really sure which. Doesn't really matter too much, because I'm not going to expand it to the entire globe for all intents and purposes. I'm just going to keep it a particular regional type thing. But I decided there are going to be each of the islands will be home to dwarves, elves, gnomes, goblins, humans, and folka, who are going to be these kind of humanoid animal lineage. So those 6. But each may also have a couple, 2 or 3 different lineages that are kind of unique to that particular island or landmass. So on Rayrik, that's going to be the halflings, reptilians, and minotaurs. Oh, and centaurs. They have 4. So they have 4 that are kind of unique there. On Ailrus, the unique ones are going to be satyrs and nymphs for reasons. Also, the additional thing that comes in there is that you needed to work out how divinities are going to work in this case. Because Rayrik has no gods, but Ailrus does. So there's that question, how do we work this out cosmologically? So the decision that I came to is that mortals create divinities. Mortals in this world create gods. But a third party may make them manifest in some cases. So in this case, since divinities need belief in order to exist, Rayrik Isle never created any divinities, never had any kind of belief in divinities in any significant amounts. Therefore, they never created any, and none exist there. Ailrus, on the other hand, had a belief or faith in divinities. They were created, but they were created by these 5 trees, maybe 6. There's debate about the 6th one existing. So on Ailrus, somewhere in this, basically Ailrus is essentially, in most basic, simplest form, I think of it as sort of a donut. It's not what the island's going to look like, but basically, for my purposes, it's easier to think of it as a donut. In the center, there's a giant forest. And in that forest is ringed by a range of mountains called the Ring, creatively currently in my notes called the Ring Mountains. And then outside of those mountains are the nations, the societies, cultures, governments, etc., that are kind of forming a ring between the sea or the ocean and the mountains. And they go into the mountains to some degree as well. But within that forest, which is connected to the wildwood, which is part of the junction and part of the multiverse, there are definitely believed to be 5 trees that essentially conceal themselves, that make themselves difficult to find, if not impossible to find. These are the Tree of Doors, which is basically a world tree. It connects to various other parts of this world as well as other parts of other worlds. There's a Tree of Life, Tree of Death, Tree of Knowledge, and Tree of Time. And then theoretically there might be a Tree of Wishes, but there's a lot of theological debate about whether that actually exists. So a lot of stuff comes out of these 5 trees. All of the gods are children of or were created through these trees. So each divinity, each kind of purview of deities is associated with a particular one of the 5 trees. The Tree of Wishes has no gods, because it may not even exist. Likewise, magic has comes from the trees, these 5 trees. So the old magic was kind of non-academic. It was intuitive in nature. It was very kind of wild. It was kind of directly connected to the trees. The modern magic is sort of evolved. It has its origins in the old magic, but it's become more formulaic. And each of the branches, each of the applications is associated with a given tree. So, for example, they are all associated with divine magic, but the idea of, say, necromancy or is associated with the Tree of Death. Healing magic is associated with the Tree of Life. Enchantment or information-based magic is associated with the Tree of Knowledge. Summoning is associated with the Tree of Doors, and so on and so forth. So that these all kind of have particular things they are connected to in this way, at least in terms of how people think about it. That may not necessarily actually be literally connected, but in terms of how people conceive of it, connect with it, interact with it, they connect and interact these with different with these ideas. So that's the kind of bit rough rundown on the third one or the other big thing I'm working on. That I'm playing with, because I've got a whole bunch I've got currently about 6-7 pages of random handwritten notes regarding that one. I have deliberately not started putting into any kind of permanent or organized form yet, because I've got these other things I want to kind of focus in on and work with, because they are big and they are nasty and they have a lot of stuff to go with them. So there's that. That's going to connect with Rayrick. I'm probably going to have to rename my Rayrick Isle file or put my file in part of something else, into a new folder that Elris can be part of as well. This is going to mess with my reference doc. So right now there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 worlds attached to this. So I had to create for my own sanity and sake, I created a spreadsheet. And on this spreadsheet there are 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different what do they call these? Worksheets. Sheets, and each of them just kind of putting together in sort of a table or column form. Basically names, in large part so I don't screw up and repeat too much. So the first sheet is God, deities and powers, semi-divine powers, that sort of stuff, that are not necessarily gods, but divine or semi-divine entities. We got fauna, any kind of animals, flora, any kind of plants, Minerals, anything with that. Oh, I've got to delete those columns because, actually, no, I'm keeping those because I'm keeping those names. I'm just changing the continent name. Yes, okay, cool. Minerals, if there are any magic that's available in that world, which means I need to change that one. People and people names for residents of places, that sort of thing. One is places, any kind of place names I've got, because, and that's going to change in there, just to keep those straight. And groups, organizations, and lineages, sentient or sapient species, because I wanted to be able to keep track of what have I used in terms of names, what have I used where. Don't want to double up on too many things. Obviously, there can be elves everywhere, but there will be different kinds, and keeping track of where they're being used and all that sort of thing. But also because at some point in the future, and this is probably like, a year or 2 years down the road, maybe 6 months on the road, we'll see how things go. I'm thinking about putting together a collection of field guides to the Junction multiverse that will probably be written as a character or as an individual within the world. These would cover things like lineages for sapient species. Magic, I think, was one that I wanted to look at. I don't remember what other ones I had in there. There were a handful that I had, but those are the two big ones. I think flora fauna was one. I had about 4 or 5 that I was thinking about. I might have had divinities possibly as one. But yeah, I was thinking about putting together these at some point in time. We'll see if that ever actually happens. But if it does, it's going to be a bit of a ways down the road. Other things are taking priority and precedence first. Get that saved and out of the way. So we're kind of running around with these things. There's also... I think I'm actually just going to, rather than try to figure out what I did there... Sorry, I'm messing around with some stuff that I've totally forgotten that I didn't back up certain things or move things around. Yeah, let's just go ahead and get rid of that. And then we'll just put this here. That'll work. Cool. Okay. So far there are 160 files related to the Junction world. So that's a big chunk of stuff. It does include some inspiration bits and does include some PDFs of things, but field guides. There we go. I have a list of field guides. Deities, flora, fauna, magic, races, and realms. Oh, yeah, realms. Realms are part of the cosmology. Forgot about that. Yeah, those are definitely going in there as well. There's a lot of those. So lots of different things that are kind of on the to-do list as far as writing goes. Always good to keep busy with that. Lots of different projects going on at once, but they're all part of the same project. What else do we have going on in there? Those are probably the big things there. So I think what I'm going to do right off the bat, or not off the bat since we're like 20 minutes in here, is I think what I'm going to do is maybe continue working on some stuff myself, or some of my stuff. In this case, the Sea of Stars, which is part of the Fairlands. And then we'll see if anybody shows up here. And if anybody happens to drop into chat and wants to talk about anything specific, we can do that. Otherwise, I'll kind of work with this and continue chatting about that a little bit. And also, in a little while, I will probably do a little self-promo stuff. So the Sea of Stars is a sort of mystery for the Fairlands. It's a place that people in the other lands don't know a whole lot about. There are several different mysteries to the Fairlands. First and foremost, we got the fair itself, which moves around, goes through all the lands, touches all of them, stays in all of them for a while, but has all kinds of weird things going on with it. Second, we got the Deathlands, which are basically a barren waste, and there's stuff going on with that in various ways. And there's the sea. Basically, the sea, there's nothing on the surface, at least nothing anybody knows about on the surface. And the people who live beneath the surface are very isolationist in many respects, or in very many respects. They are not really big on dealing with the surface, dealing with people above. So this one has the file is divided into two sections. One is what people kind of above see, which is next to nothing, and then the other part is what's kind of going on beneath the surface. So I've gotten almost all of the. I've gotten pretty much everything on the beneath the surface down. It's down to about only 27 to 36%, only about a third left. And that's going to be organizations, ones that kind of go cross-cultural organizations, mostly specific locations, which are generally geographic or particular building type things, and then settlements and major people, notable people. So we are going to have, because of how things work in the sea, this organization called the Deep Watchers. So this group basically, they keep an eye on the deep parts of the ocean or sea, making sure that nothing down there comes up. So part of the thing with the Sea of Stars is that, or the fair realms in general, is that every realm there aren't any divinities. There are the powers, and the powers are basically quasi-divine, but not actually divine. And they take various forms and have various abilities, and they're tied to the land itself, and their particular powers are tied to the land or specific to the land, which is why every fair land has different magic. In this case, with the sea, one of the powers is known as the Sleeper. And the magic of the fair land, or the sea, is basically ley lines that go beneath the water. And the idea is that if the Sleeper, who is currently trapped and basically kept in a coma or like hibernation, if the Sleeper wakes, then the Sleeper will, according to legends, according to myth, destroy the ley line network, which would basically wipe out all the powers of the ley mages. Potentially send a bunch of them into catatonic states, possibly wipe the entirety of the Sea of Stars out of existence, as if it had never been there in the first place, and maybe destroy all life in the Fairlands. So they are really big on making sure the Sleeper doesn't get up, because all kinds of bad stuff happens. So this particular organization, they're dealing with the really, really deep parts of the sea. Nobody really knows where the Sleeper is, just that two of the other powers effectively trapped them somewhere, presumably under the sea somewhere. Excuse me. Nope, wrong word. It does help when I can spell. Okay, so the watchers are dealt with, and most of what I'm doing right now with this particular document, really almost all the fair documents, is my first pass through each document. I was naming places, coming up with notes, basically putting together rough ideas about everything, so I get a good sense of what things are going to look like. And then I'm going back now, excuse me, and converting those notes into like complete sentences, complete thoughts, things that are actually readable and can be understood by people who are not me, essentially. So I'm just opening up my tea here because I am clearly in need of caffeine. So, there we go. Put that to the side. I'm clearly in need of caffeine, so we'll go with this. Okay. What's next here? Locations. Basically, I've only got one kind of intercultural group in the sea so far, and all of these are just kind of so far. Things on there are going to change. They're going to be morphed and messed with, and all that sort of stuff at various points in time as they start evolving the setting and working with different things. Okay, so you have a very small set of islands, a small archipelago, but it's really, really, really far out from the coast. Like about a month and a half with good, favorable winds. It's basically legendary in the Fairlands, but and people don't necessarily think it actually exists and all that sort of thing. And they're all very small. Most under a single. And basically, these are really tiny, these are really small. They don't have that many people on them. I think I put in something about... Oh, okay, that one's way too small. With a single house on it. So I kind of look, tend to look some things up, and that one's way too small. But thinking about sizes of islands and these sorts of things, and there are some really, really tiny ones that only have they're just big enough for one house to be built on them. That's kind of crazy. But this one is pretty small. The largest is about 3 square miles, which is not particularly big, and a fairly small population. I think, if I recall correctly, I might have built that out of let me double check that. I want to say I built that out of here. That's one of the smallest ones. That might be the smallest one. Nope, that one's pretty big. Comparatively. Okay. I don't know where I was building that out of, but I built it off of somewhere. Hey there. How are things? Yeah, I finally get to be able to do that, and I finally get to be able to sleep in a couple of weeks once the kid's off school. Yeah, hopefully caffeine will work. It's kind of that time of year with all kinds of crazy stuff going on. I was just kind of poking around with working on some fair stuff, but I am kind of happy to talk about anything and anywhere. I did kind of start out a little bit with some stuff about the kind of fiddling with mixing a couple settings combined into one, particularly with the new kind of thought / idea and the whole multiple magics, different land masses idea, which was kind of, I think I found a solution to in this particular case. I actually didn't really talk about that at all in there previously, but I do think I found a solution to that that I think will work out quite well, or I'm reasonably happy with, at least. So basically, what I decided on with that, or thought of with that, is, and I kind of talked about some of the things that I decided some of these, rather than being big land masses, I'm going to go with islands. So the primary island, the first one that I started working with off of threads and such, ended up being, I decided to be about the size of Great Britain, roughly speaking. Figuring that's big enough to have a reasonable number of good sized cities, reasonable population, but not being too massive. Then deciding that this other thing was going to have the trees bit that I mentioned over there as well, was going to be about the size of Greenland. So I decided I didn't want to necessarily do a mainland. This other one's going to be an island probably about the size of Greenland, it's about 10 times the size of the previous one, roughly speaking. But I figured out some things that are going to be kind of consistent across the different land masses to kind of create a continuity between them, but also how different magics on different land masses can work. So I'm going back to an idea that I've kind of played with, mentioned, brought up, thought about for a while. That is the idea of magic evolving over time, or being quasi-living as a sort of thing. With this idea that it's kind of evolving to fit views and beliefs of people who practice it. So since these islands of this world are going to be largely separate from each other, days to weeks apart from each other by like, say, sea travel, depending on winds and all that fun stuff, of course, that in the formative centuries, formative eras of the societies, of the populations, they developed different forms, different sources in each of the land masses, as it kind of evolved to fit the people who were on that particular landmass. So in the case of the first island, they kind of evolved to a more, I don't know, I want to say kind of sedate, not sedate, evolved to how the society was kind of working and how people were thinking about things. In this particular case, evolving to work out of essentially 5 trees, and I got kind of mythological with them, so that we've got maybe 6. There's debate about the 6th one. So I mythologically drew things from drew a tree of knowledge. We got a tree of life, a tree of death, a tree of time, and a tree of doors, basically world tree for all intents and purposes. And then, but changed name to of doors because that fits the tree of blank continuity that the other 4 have. And then pulling from a kind of almost medieval / mythological tree of wishes that people aren't really certain exists. There's debate about this. Some people might say the 6th tree is out there and it exists and all that sort of stuff, but others are like, yeah, no, that's just a story. But everything on that island kind of is built around those 3, so that there are all of the divinities are associated with one of those trees. So the trees effectively gave birth to them or created them, much like thinking of yes, exactly, yes. Much like the Castleton setup, where you have the core group of deities and the demigods coming out of them. In this case, we got the trees and the deities coming out of the trees, basically, as a kind of idea. And then, but also the idea of different branches of magic being associated with different trees as well. So, like, what did I put down there? Like, like necromancy tied to the tree of death, summoning being tied to the tree of doors, that's that sort of thing. Enchantment, I think I'm going with knowledge with enchantment. Mind stuff, mind affecting, mind altering, that sort of thing seems to fit with that. So that sort of thing. But the big thing was figuring out how these will interact with each other, if at all. It's always an issue I have when I'm thinking about multiple magics in a particular setting, is how do they respond to each other? How do they interact with each other? Particularly if there are different sources, different causes in different areas. So I decided that each large island is going to have basically its own. But then there'll be small island clusters that will have the same, basically, if they're kind of geographically close to each other, because they'll have basically same kind of cultural basics. So I'm thinking, like, if we had a situation like, obviously Greenland is kind of itself. Great Britain's kind of itself. But if we had a thing like, say, the Japanese islands, then they would probably have the same. All of those islands would probably have the same type, the same base at least, because they share enough cultural elements and geographic elements and they're close enough to each other that would work out, I think. They decided that the effect of each landmass's specific type will extend out about maybe to a certain distance offshore. I'm figuring probably about 50, 60 miles seems like good. That's going to be 5-10 days, depending on winds, by sea. That's a decent distance out there. Probably less than that. I think let's see, medieval ships, I looked up a bunch of stuff, figuring between 2 and 7 miles an hour, depending on winds. So, yeah, that gives a decent distance between them there. When they're closer, things can get a little weird. Actually, it's going to be less than that, because you figure that's per hour. Sorry, that was per hour, not per day. So that would be approximately a day or so offshore. I'm badly mathing. There's a reason I haven't done math in any significant way in 27, 28 years. But figuring it's going to be about a reach of about a day or two offshore, basically. And then in between those areas, it's not so much that it goes away, or that it's magic dead on the oceans or whatnot, but rather that it becomes more. The way I have it in my notes is more suggestible or more malleable, more kind of open to individual interpretation of how it works in some regards, or to use a more sort of D&D route of things, essentially might become something like wild magic for all intents and purposes when it's outside of those ranges, where all kinds of weird things can happen. So kind of setting up working that stuff out. And these are just kind of little quick notes for the time being, because there's all sorts of little things and little stuff that have been popping into my head looking at different things. And as things have gone on, I've been working on other projects. So I'm really kind of pushing to get the Fairlands ones kind of, as many of them as I can, wrapped up within this week, because things are going to get crazy next week. But and of course there'll be things like figuring out how society reacts to this or forms this and all that sort of thing. This is something Dino brought to mind a while back, or brought back into my mind a while back, was all the different social interactions or society's responses to different magic systems and whatnot, and how much depends on how it works, how widespread it is, how easy it is, who can learn it, who has access to it, whether that be how much everything in there comes into play with whether anybody can learn, and then how society decides to control who gets to learn or who gets that kind of education, versus their genetic components versus their psychological components that are necessary. I'm kind of thinking, for example, obviously we've got tons of examples of genetic components floating around out there. Most of the urban fantasy genre, most of the paranormal romance genre has a genetic component to it somewhere for magic. But thinking of the Die comics, or the Die comic series, where some of the magic requires the individual maintaining a particular emotional state, or even looking at, I think, Sanderson, where certain magics are aided by having experienced certain traumas, and that sort of thing. So the psychological component requirement going into things, and how that kind of affects how society deals with or works with the concept and whatnot. Obviously, power, of course, comes into play. How powerful or how reliable magic is coming into play for how society responds to it. We got practicality of society coming into play. I'm particularly fond of the Carrie Pratchett's response, both with the wizards and the witches, particularly with Ankh-Morpork, with the whole idea of what was it? The wizards agree that that they owe taxes to the city so long as the city doesn't try to collect them, and the city acknowledges that the wizards could destroy the entire place if they chose to, so long as they don't choose to, sort of thing. while the witches have the whole respect through generally fear slash mysteriousness to some degree, or through, in Nanny Ogg's cases, just generally being too likable, uh, sort of thing. But thinking about looking at how those come into play, and then we have who, if anybody can pick things up, even if it is limited in certain ways, whether it be genetically or otherwise. Um, just because somebody has the capability doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have access to training in many respects, so that the society could have limits that come into play that prevent people from actually being able to learn, to control or use their talent or potential or capability, potential, whatever it happens to be. We see, I think, some of that in what was her name? I'm blanking on the name of the author. Let me double check here. I've got it downstairs, but it's not up here. Trudy Canavan's Magician's Guild, which is a really kind of interesting series in some respects, in terms of how she approaches magic and whatnot. But in Magician's Guild, basically, lots of people have the capability, but only people who are in the upper class get the opportunity to learn. To the point that it's generally believed that only members of the aristocracy, members of the nobility, have the talent to learn, because for a century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries, they're the only ones who've been allowed to. But in doing so, they have to give up all claim to any kind of title or family in those regards, so that magicians can't be in charge of government or in government posts or anything like that, which is a response to a neighboring government that had a neighboring nation that had taken over the primary core nations in the past. So it's kind of those ideas of what are the kind of natural laws that kind of limit things? What are the kind of social laws that come into play and limit things? Because obviously, if you're in charge of a government and you've got people who can throw around fireballs and stuff, you want to kind of put some kind of controls in place to prevent them from doing that all over the place. Otherwise, we have lots and lots of issues going on. Whether that be drafting them immediately or putting vilifying potentially, or putting other kind of limits in place. Lawrence Watt Evans recently, or not recently, back in like the 70s, 80s with Ethshar, put in something about basically the essentially self-policing magic organizations, guilds, essentially, that were, they were not allowed to be part of the government, but they were essentially an extra government agency that kept charge of making sure that there was control over who had magic, who could use it, who could learn it, what they could do with it, when they could do things with it, that sort of stuff, for various reasons. And I think he was kind of a kitchen sink, everything in the kitchen sink set of magics. But yeah, I'm just kind of playing around with some of those thoughts and some of those ideas. And obviously the effects of what happens when magic and religion come together as major paranormal / supernatural forces, or the major things dealing with paranormal forces, and the kind of either the kind of situation of either we become one and the same, or we become utter and complete rivals, or potentially somewhere in between. and all that fun stuff that comes into play there. Not to mention all the economic and other things that can go on with that. All kinds of those things that are wonderful things to think about and pop up and keep running through my head and keep new projects popping into mind. Which I'm sure never happens to anyone ever, but so anyway, yeah, just messing around with a bunch of those things. Did come across something, I don't remember what it was. It was kind of cryptic about what was it that I came across there? It was a bit cryptic yesterday, 2 days ago, about something that popped up on Kickstarter. There it was. That's what it was. It was the yes, never ever, doesn't happen at all. I was poking around Kickstarter randomly, which I should know better than to do, because bad things always come out of that, or almost lots of bad things come out of that, because I keep finding things I want to back that I can't afford to back. But I was poking around and came across, where is this from? What company is this? Black Cube Games. What all do they have here? No, I don't want to follow them. I want to see their... Where are they? Okay, there we go. That'll work. This Black Cube Games out of the Netherlands that has done... What have they done in the past? They have a lot of funded ones. A lot of... Looks like these are... Not sure what those are. Those look like they're... Oh, they're adventure series. But they've also done some kind of organization books and resources for particularly 5e. Guilds, organizations, that sort of thing. They've got one that's Order and Guild, Organization Guide. They've built a bunch of different things, that sort of stuff. Anyway, the thing that popped up with them was a book they're working on now called Order of Tavern. I'm assuming they wanted to put the in there, but Dutch. Basically, this popped up, and immediately my mind goes to a kind of secret order of tavern owners, that sort of thing. That all of the tavern owners, who, in many cases, look the same in various RPG worlds and whatnot, are all kind of part of the same group and same organization. That is not what they were doing. What they're doing is putting together a 450 plus page book of at least 50 different taverns that can just be dropped in at will to campaigns, that sort of thing. Yeah, exactly. I went the operatives, and they're all part of a big like secret organization thing, or multiple rival secret organizations. They're going with tavern as an organization, individual taverns as organizations, and looking at them that way. So they've got a document of, I think they're at approximately 50 right now, roughly 450 pages with 50 different taverns going into play, just to kind of be dropped in. Yes, exactly, stuff like that. Yeah. The Order of the Cauldron, the Order of the Keg, the Order of the Cask, the Order of the Bottle, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, and they're all kind of at odds with each other in various ways, or have their own goals and that sort of thing. That kind of popped into my head looking at it, and I looked at what they actually have listed on the campaign, going, nope, that's not what they're doing at all. But that did create a nice little connection, a nice link between some things for me. So that was good. That was kind of helpful, kind of underscoring a link between the two major islands I'm thinking of so far for this particular Otherworld project thing. But yeah, that was we've been around long enough in various in gaming, in fantasy gaming and whatnot, for the everyone starts in the tavern, and we've gone through thousands of different taverns with hundreds of different tavern keepers who are all basically the same person. But there was a really great comic that played with that a while back. I can't remember which one it was now. Shoot, it was a web comic, I want to say, where maybe it was a print comic too, but it was the whole tavern just kind of teleported. It was the same tavern in every city, and the tavern just teleported ahead of the group of adventurers, so that every town, every city, every village had the tavern. It looks oddly similar to the tavern, to the previous tavern, but it was literally all really the same tavern that just kept moving around the different settlements, and kind of driving the players a little crazy as they started realizing that it wasn't just that they all look the same, but they actually are really the same. Yeah, basically, yeah. All kinds of fun things that can go with that, as far as the hive mind of barkeeps. I'm not familiar with the messenger. Hi, Flynn. CV, I'm not familiar with the messenger. Was that a book? Was that a series? Okay. That would be why I'm not familiar with it. All right. Haven't done significant stuff in video games since middle school, maybe, which is a long time ago. Aside from an occasional once or every so often, and actually, there's a little bit in college. Did some Diablo in college, but yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of significant video game in quite a while. But yeah, I was kind of poking around with some things and came across this Black Whatever Games Kickstarter thing for this Order of Tavern, and different thing. What popped into my head was different from what they were actually doing, and my head went to all kinds of different places, secret societies and all of that sort of stuff, which would be all kinds of fun. And I'm kind of running with it a little bit on a side project once I get kind of nice. That kind of reminds me a little bit too of, although it seems to be set in one place, I have to check in with him about it. That kind of seems to be some of my conception or some of my kind of understanding of Quincy's Tavern, the Lucky Griffin, that floats around here on YouTube and whatnot. Yeah, that idea that it's kind of I suspect that his crossroads seems like it's a bit of a pocket dimension sort of thing, because the doors seem to open to everywhere for the tavern. But that might be something to. I know he's worked a little bit on the world building with that, but not massively, from what I recall, or at least not so that I've seen too much of it. But yeah, a lot of what we were since you just came in, a fair bit of what we were talking about was I was talking about, we were both kind of bringing stuff in, was mixes of magic systems and society, how things just kind of building off ideas for various projects and whatnot. New TTRPG Kickstarter. What are you referring to? I'm not sure what you're referring to in there. I'm going to go ahead and throw there. Actually, I can just go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and link here. because I always forget what I made the add-on there. There it is. Cool. Basically, I'm not necessarily working on any kind of... no, I'm not doing a Kickstarter. Someone else's. It was a Kickstarter that I was floating around, that I was poking around Kickstarter and grabbed some inspiration from things that randomly popped up. This was a thing that was called Order of Tavern by... let me see who the company was. Because I totally blanked on it, even though I just looked at it a few moments ago. It's being put together by Black Cube Games in the Netherlands. That set up a bunch of different ideas popping into my head. What I'm working on is that. Basically, I've been spending, I don't know how long, basically a while, putting together bits and pieces and kind of expanding on this sort of multiverse world that I'm kind of been playing with in various ways. Currently, I think it's about 6 different worlds, including the central area. Yes, yeah, Hell definitely is an interesting one in that regard too. Yeah, with the wizards and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, what I'm working on is more kind of world building for the sake of world building. But it could certainly be used for various purposes. I might do some... Occasionally I get the mood to dabble in some short fiction, and I might do some stuff with that. I'm definitely planning at some point in time to do some essentially in-world books that are... how do I put it? Written by somebody in the world, so they would be kind of exist in the world, but also something that I put together. That'd be sort of like field guides to the multiverse and whatnot, just for fun. But that's a little ways down the road before I even start to kind of put those together or think about those. That said, I said earlier I was going to go ahead and do a little self-promo, so I can go ahead and do a little self-promo as well. Over on... Actually, let me just do this way. That's faster. Over on my site, which I'm going to put back a specific page back in chat, we do have, because the holiday season's coming up, all kinds of fun stuff, like old book that is very old, newer book with world building and magic systems, which some folks have found to be useful and interesting, and newest book, which has now spent going on 13 months on different best-selling lists over on Amazon. So I'm kind of happy about that, even though they're small, little small lists. But 13 weeks in the top 100 on a couple different lists has been very good for things. Yeah, so throw in some Fae on one of the worlds. Other worlds have other things. I've got myself a nice little... I ended up having to put together a spreadsheet of basically all sorts of different things for the 6 different worlds that are currently connected to everything. So on... Where did I have Fae? I don't think I had Fae as Fae at this point. But I do have... Yes, I do. I have Fae Beasts on the Unestria setting. I didn't have Fae as Fae, but there are definitely... Oh, yeah, there are Fae-kin and Alhara. And Fae-kin on Unestria. And Fae Beasts on Unestria as well. And a bunch of other things I'm kind of messing around with. They're kind of fun to work with. But I had to put together a list of, or a spreadsheet with a bunch of different, basically every named thing in the multiverse so far for all of the world, separated by all the worlds, so that I can actually keep track of things and hopefully not reuse names and that sort of stuff too much. A little bit of reuse I'm cool with, because it is a multiverse and they do kind of, there is going back and forth across multiverse and all that sort of stuff, but there's also sanity for myself, to put it that way, where I'm trying to keep myself sane and not lose track of things. think I have seen. Okay. What else am I working on? So, other thing, this week I'm kind of doing a push to get this Fairlands setting, or as much of it done, typed up in a way that people can read. Because right now I've still got two, I don't know, roughly a third documents that are basically just rough notes that I don't expect anyone else to be able to make sense out of, or make significant sense out of. Because next week things go a little nuts. Because next week is finals week with all kinds of grading and all that fun stuff. So my kind of goal is pushing through this week and getting as much as I can converted to readable stuff, so that I can have all that kind of out of my way and out of mind before I go into the craziness of continual grading and such for a week. But then after that week, I can work on some other stuff. But so I've been playing around with a bunch of that stuff, kind of working out some things. Right now, kind of what was the word I'm looking for? Alphabetically, just kind of going through and putting together things for the Sea of Stars setting, which is Sea of Stars land in the Fairlands. Base of the Fairlands are, I think, an interesting one in some respects. Kind of inspired. The initial thought for them was inspired by Acadia National Park, where it was at this past summer, which is a set of islands up north of Michigan, about 4 hours ferry north of Michigan. That is basically, it is one of the least visited national parks, but also the most revisited national park. It just takes a while to get up to it. But that kind of inspired the forest, or the what I think I refer to as the refuge forest, and then that kind of created all these other ones around in a kind of an arc, part of which was the sea. And the sea is kind of one of the mysteries of the Fairlands. It's that kind of place where there's not really much of anything on the surface, and the people who are under the surface, which is where everything is going on, aren't really happy, just want to be on their own, basically. They want to be left to their own devices and doing their own thing. So they're just kind of there. And they're a bit of a mystery for everybody else. While the others try to live their lives, do their things, find out stuff, all that sort of thing. The folks at the sea are just kind of like, leave us alone and go away for all intents and purposes. But so they've got some locations they get to work on here, and a few settlements they put together, and then the people who are major people who are in that area, major personalities and whatnot. So all kinds of little fun stuff to work with on there. Then we get into what's left after that. After that, I get the 7 cities, which is sort of the hub of the Fairlands. And then I've got the Weirdlands, which are basically where the various human-animal shifters are kind of based out of, or where they originated for this particular world. So they're kind of... It's generally a wild territory. It's not necessarily a heavily settled area for various reasons. The weird beasts essentially control the whole thing, so you can get some towns, but nothing particularly big. And most of the towns and such that exist at the exist because the weird groups in the area have decided that yes, it's okay for you to exist, basically. And if but that can be rescinded at any point in time. The 7 cities, on the other hand, are 7 fairly big cities in the middle. Each of these areas have powers rather than gods. They're kind of semi-divine entities. In the case of the cities, it's archmages. In the case of the Weirdlands, it's the founders, who are I want to say I had 9. but I want to double check that because how many are there? There were a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I guess there were 11. Okay. That there were also supposed to be multiples of. Oh, well, they've got 11. Okay, that's fine. Basically, 11 foundational shapeshifters, essentially. But they're kind of uber shifters in some regards. So they have different capabilities, and their shifting ability is broader than those of all of the kind of mortal shapeshifters and whatnot, and they're essentially immortal. And then you got the seven, then the sea. There are the navigators. You got the three, possibly four powers that are referred to as navigators collectively. Basically, the magic of the sea of stars is ley lines, or using ley lines. So the architect is the navigator who essentially makes new lines, creates a network of ley lines around the whole Fairlands, and seems to be obsessed with creating a very specific pattern and network of lines. The seer, on the other hand, uses the lines to kind of gather and learn things. So the seer is constantly flooded with information from around the Fairlands. Anything that happens within a certain distance of a ley line, the seer knows about, basically. Then you've got the creator, who no one's really sure if the creator exists. The creator's stories of the creator only appear in some regions. It's like maybe a quarter of the area under the sea that's settled has stories about them. The other 3/4 or so doesn't have any story about the creator. But the creator is basically, if they existed, then they're attributed with creating sentient, sapient life and other life beneath the sea. Most of the denizens of the Sea of Stars kind of dismiss this story as like, yeah, you know what, it's just a story. There's no real evidence for this, as opposed to the other three navigators. But those who do hold that story are very insistent upon the truth of that and the existence of the creator. The important one, or really important one, is the sleeper, which I'm kind of borrowing a little bit from some Hindu writing, or some post-Hindu, some modern urban fantasy that uses Hindu mythology, from a Roshani Chakshi, and I'm probably badly mispronouncing her name, who wrote for the Riordan Presents line. But the sleeper is basically, her sleeper works differently, but I took the name just kind of spawned in comments, and I realized it came from that, or spawned ideas, but I'm pretty sure it came from that. The sleeper has basically been trapped in a state of hibernation, for all intents and purposes, probably somewhere under the sea. The story goes that the architect and the seer managed somehow to ensnare them in a trap of ley lines that the seer then linked through various spells that they're the only one who really knows, because they know everything, basically. But the story goes that if the sleeper, who in good ancient mythology fashion is the agent of chaos, or an agent of chaos, were to waken, were to come out of this hibernation, then they would basically destroy the ley line network, which would wipe out all the magic of the Sea of Stars. In the process, that could also cause practitioners to go catatonic, or it could cause them to die, or it could wipe out the entirety of life in the sea or the entire Fairlands. There's debate about whether the sleeper's destruction of the network would be violent or whether it would be like the network was just shutting down, like a power grid. Uh, there's some discussion about that. There's debate about that. There is the thought that should the sleeper awake and they do take out the architect and the seer, or they do take out the ley network, that all life potentially in the entirety of the Fairlands would end, literally. So the people of the sea are very big on don't let the sleeper wake up, because bad stuff will happen, sort of idea, or bad stuff could happen idea. So that's kind of where some of that is standing, kind of working through some of these things. We've got about, I don't know, 3 more pages of notes there to kind of work with. We've got another over 3,300 words of notes to work with on the cities. Yeah, they're definitely isolationists. They all live under the sea. They have the Sea of Stars. They're all your they definitely have not necessarily discrimination, but definitely they are they don't allow others into that land. That land is basically a big ocean. It's called the Sea of Stars. It's basically a big ocean. Those are all your merfolk, your tritons, your part water elementals, all of that sort of thing. So there's basically nothing on the surface aside from a small chain of tiny islands. And they don't take kindly to what they refer to as incursions, or ships from the land, the surface lands, coming into their coming over the sea. So they're kind of big on sinking ships or turning back ships, or sinking ships and taking over, taking the whatever crew survive, and then there is potential that on this one set of islands, which is roughly a month and a half away from the coast by boat, given good winds, probably double that, maybe triple that with against winds or bad winds. That this archipelago with very, very tiny islands, about anywhere from 1 square mile to 3 square miles in size, has potentially some people on it from the surface lands, who were sort of captured, who survived having ships sunk and that sort of thing, and were just taken over there to be held, essentially, for all intents and purposes. But not very many of those, even, because these are like really tiny little islands. None of them are particularly big. 1 to 3 square miles is rather small. So yeah, they are definitely self-sufficient, because they are they're your merfolk and your tritons and all that sort of stuff. So they have their own societies and civilizations underwater, under the sea. They have their own kind of farming and herding and all that sort of stuff down there. Oh yeah, definitely. At the moment, I'm kind of doing all of this just to get these ideas out of my head, because so yeah, I do a lot of world building for its own sake, mostly to get ideas out of my head. I might do some short fiction at some point in time, possibly, depending on how things go and how my mood goes for that. I may eventually convert some of it over to some kind of TTRPG system. If I did, I would probably go I think if I did, I would go GURPS route, because that would be, I think, easiest to convert magic systems to, and that sort of thing. I could probably, because those would be more intuitive in converting magic systems and such. As far as those in the islands, I think they may have initially been taken for the purposes of information, They may have been taken out of, depending on who sank the ships, they may have been taken as part of a, oh, you survived, we'll be merciful sort of situations, and then they kind of were left on the island and forgotten about for all intents and purposes. But there's not so much space for them to really kind of grow at all, because they're really, really tiny islands. But yeah, I think if I was going to convert it, I may convert them at some point, and if I do, it'd probably be to a probably, I would say GURPS is probably the one I would kind of lean toward as being the most the easiest for me to do while keeping a lot of the flavor side of things, and putting the flavor into a kind of stat format. It's also kind of personal preferences in a lot of respects. I'm sure I could probably work a conversion to something like 5e or even Pathfinder, but one of the issues I've had in those cases, an issue I've had with D&D for a long, long time, back into like the 80s, is the whole, if I want to do a new magic, I have to create a new class from scratch sort of idea, because the magic system is so tied to the class gives the system the flavor. Yeah, definitely. I'm not really too concerned about monetizing at this stage or at this point. I'm just kind of writing to get the ideas out and just to kind of do it. Especially since I do have monetized monetized AP. Yeah, what would that be? Monetized IP out there already. And I may at some point in time, I may have a fourth book in me at some point in time. I don't know. When I finished the first one, I didn't think I had any more books in me, or I was just like, nope, I'm not going to do this because it was traumatic enough. Converting a dissertation into a book, or converting half a dissertation into a third of a book, and then building the other 2/3. But, back, it would have been during COVID lockdowns, I decided, you know what, I've been editing a lot of people's work. I need to write some of my own stuff, and screw the thinking about what's going to be academic or what's going to be that sort of thing, as much of the publication was previously. I'm just going to write what I want and see what'll happen. And fortunately, very, very fortunately, the publisher I worked with for book 1 decided that, hey, yeah, they were happy to take a second one, even though it wasn't quite what they usually did. So it wasn't anywhere near what a lot of the stuff they usually did or published was. So I was very grateful to them for that and for taking a chance on that. And it seems to have panned out pretty well. So I may have a fourth book in me somewhere. I don't know. I'm definitely taking a break from that sort of writing for a bit, because I did 2 fairly intensive, fairly thought and research intensive works pretty much back to back. I was doing notes and outlining 3 while 4 was going through cover design and layout and all of that sort of stuff. So it was kind of crazy. Editing rates. That's a good question. I do have a document about that once I track it down again. Where did I put that? Should be under here. I had a whole thing written up for that. And that's not that. Where did I put that? There we go. Editing work. Yes, that would be where I would put things. Yes, that would make logical sense. So let's see. What do I do generally? Depends on what kind of editing we're dealing with. If it's proofreading, just spelling, punctuation, that sort of stuff, I'm pretty cheap. If it's editing, copy editing, where you're looking at grammar, clarity, that sort of thing, a little bit more. And then like content editing with like accuracy, development, that sort of stuff, goes up a little bit more than that. And then if it's copy or content with length reduction, I do have a little extra thing for basically cutting words, essentially, because I've had that in the past, where people have had a maximum word count they've had to work with. But proofing, I generally do. So I generally define a page as typed, double spaced, 1 inch margin, 12-point font, Times New Roman, about 275 or so words. So for proofing, I generally do about $1.50 a page. For copy editing, grammar, clarity, that sort of thing, I up that to 3 a page because it's much more involved. And then for like content editing, for like accuracy, development, that sort of thing, I jump that up. I bring that up a little bit further to about four per page, which would be roughly 275 words on average. And what do I do with that? Generally, turnaround time, of course, depends on the length of the work. The longer the work, the more turnaround time is necessary for obvious reasons. But I have worked on a bunch of stuff in the past, from grant proposals to dissertations, magazine articles. I worked on this wonderful book edited by a friend of mine a little while back, which is a kind of a fun book. I highly recommend it. I also worked on this novel, also by the same person, that is in its newest edition now with a much better cover, much nicer cover now. We'll go ahead and plug her a little bit. I'm actually going to put a link to her stuff in my chat here. I will definitely plug Teresa's stuff because she has sent me a lot of work in the past, and she has also written some really, really wonderful and really great stuff. Let me see if I can get this to a better setup than this thing, because I don't like all this extra crap attached to the URL. There we go. That should work. Does that work? Yes. Awesome. Let me go ahead and plug her too, because, it's that time of year when people are looking for gift stuff, and she's got some really good books, both fiction and nonfiction, edited and otherwise. Including things, she's done some work with Star Trek. She's got Dante's Garden, which is a time travel historical fantasy, or time travel whatever, set in the garden of a garden in Bomarzo, Italy, that she generally takes writers through for she does writers tours in Italy. And she takes writers through there pretty regularly. It's actually being sold in the gift shop there too. She's done a lot of work on Star Trek. She's done a lot of work on vampires and circuses and all sorts of other things. So there's a lot of fun, a lot of good stuff out there. So I will definitely plug her as well. But yeah, I think generally speaking, if it's just proofing, I'll do about $1.50 a page. If it's copy editing, grammar, clarity, I'll do about 3. And if it's content editing, I'll do about, with accuracy, development, that sort of thing. If it involves any kind of like fact checking, that sort of stuff, which probably wouldn't be an issue in that situation, I do about 4. If there's any kind of length reduction is necessary, which shouldn't be an issue in that case, I wouldn't think, but is in some cases for like articles, that sort of stuff. I generally put on an additional 1% of the necessary word count reduction. So if it needs to go down by 1,000 words, then I put on an extra $10. So that sort of thing, because it takes time. It takes extra time to cut words from things. Extra time and extra skill to reduce word counts. But yeah, I'd be happy to take a look at things and be happy to work with stuff. Yeah, that would be awesome if that happens to work out. Especially being the same time zone and such. I would definitely be interested. I've worked on a whole bunch of stuff in the past. It's been a little while since my last big editing job, but that would be a blast. Let's see. I think on that note, I think I am kind of at the end of my stuff for the day. I do need to go off and do some. What part of the East Coast? I am not on the East Coast, but I'm in the Eastern time zone. I am Northern Midwest. Some might not say we're in the Midwest, but I'm about a state and a half over from. I'm over in Ohio, Central Ohio. So not too far from John Scalzi, actually, of all people. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm, yes, going to school there doesn't necessarily mean I'm still there. I did go to Penn State for a little while as well, and I'm not living in Pennsylvania. There's that too, yes. Yes, there's a lot of history there. We got, spent 6 years there for 2 degrees, and we had a lot of discussion of the history. My father-in-law was actually a student there when the whole infamous incident took place. He was not on campus that day, fortunately, but he had friends who were. Yeah, so that was that's a bit of part of his family history as well, or my wife's family history as well. Yeah. But yeah, I was also at Penn State for a year and did a little bit of class there. And yeah, not living in Pennsylvania anymore. That was 1 year out of the way before being drawn back into the black hole that is Ohio, or that Ohio has become. We used to be a wonderful state, and we've kind of gone downhill the last couple decades for various reasons. Gerrymandering will do that for you. Have some friends in Philly. Actually have some relatives out there too. The extended relatives out there too. I think my wife has a couple cousins living in there. Yeah, I remember Florida being fairly good at one point in time. The last time I was in Florida would have been 95, I want to say. I think I was last in Florida spring of 95. That sounds about right. For a school trip to play in the Disney Orlando's Easter Parade. That was an interesting. That was an interesting experience, especially marching in. What would that be? Mid-spring Florida, but having winter fall band uniforms for northern Ohio. We had about half a dozen or more people pass out after the parade was over, just from heat and everything else. Even though we were marching after dusk. Yeah, it was after dusk. It was night. We were mostly night when we were marching. We still had people pass out from heat. But that was an experience. Anywho, I think on that note, since I do got to run off shortly and take care of some things, I'm going to go ahead and maybe raid over to. I'm going to go ahead and call for today. I'm going to go ahead and raid over to. I think I'm going to try maybe harass Noir Enigma a little bit more. So just a quick reiteration, I'm Brent. I'm an author, amateur world builder, writing educator. You can find me as werewolf_doctor on _dr, on Threads, Instagram, Patreon, Ko-Fi, YouTube, and werewolf-dr on Bluesky. That's what that thing is. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Let's see the stream here. And I always forget where these things are. And poke around a little bit till I find it. There it is. Cool. I'll go over there and harass him a little bit. See if his chat is harassing him with follows and links and all that fun stuff. And have a good day. In 3, 2, 1...